Chapter 2696. Qin Mu was stunned. Qin Chen smiled, but if you don't care about him at all, then, it doesn't matter. Just let him run his own course. Qin Mu's lips moved slightly. Qin Chen curled his lips and looked at her lightly. After a long time, Qin Mu finally said in a low voice, "Qin Chen, I want to go and have a look." "Okay." Qin Chen smiled slightly and suddenly asked, "Do you know where he is?" Qin Mu pursed her lips, "In the villa we used to live in." "It seems that you know each other." Qin Chen smiled gently and then looked at her, "Do you know why I came back?" Qin Chen got up, took his laptop, and opened a series of databases in front of her. "I found this." After saying that, he showed the files to Qin Mu. She believed that Qin Mu could bear it. Because she was a mother now, nothing could overwhelm her. However, she didn't expect that when Qin Mu saw the files, her tears fell down. Unexpectedly, tears fell down one by one. Qin Chen also felt a little sad. He took a tissue and wiped Qin Mu's tears. "Don't cry. Go if you want to." Qin Mu looked at Qin Chen. Qin Chen smiled, "I'll take you there." Qin Mu was stunned for a long time and suddenly said, "Did you come back because of Zhou Chengguang?" "Yes, idiot." Qin Chen knocked her head, "There is an idiot who is well taken care of. What should I worry about? At worst, I will marry someone else with my ex-husband's child." Qin Mu was stunned. "You are not stupid. You just refuse to accept this fact. You would rather think that the person you have sex with is Gu Zhe, right?" Qin Chen smiled, "So, there are so many flaws in it, but you still easily believe Gu Zhe's words. Qin Mu, you have been hypnotizing yourself." Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly. "Take me to him." Qin Chen got up, took her hand, and walked out together. In the car, he handed her the tissue box. "Cry if you want. It's normal for a pregnant woman to cry." Qin Mu's eyes were slightly red, and then she turned her face away awkwardly. "I'm not in a hurry." Although she said that she was not in a hurry, she cried out, "Qin Chen, you must have a way to save him, right?" As Qin Chen started the car, he said, "Qin Mu, I have checked. Zhou Chengguang did not apply for a liver source from the World Hospital Organization, so I said that he gave up on himself." Qin Mu was still in a daze, and her fingernails deeply sank into her flesh. Last night, she was still thinking about Gu Zhe, and now she was willing to risk her life for Zhou Chengguang. But she knew that the instinctive reaction was what her heart wanted. She even suspected that even if the child was Gu Zhe's, her final choice might not necessarily be Gu Zhe. If something really happened to Zhou Chengguang. She tightened her lips and didn't say anything. She thought of the way Zhou Chengguang looked when he left that day. He must have known it long ago. Or, he just found out. And he saved Shuemu that day, so, the scene of that day emerged in her mind. In fact, Qin Chen was right. She had been running away. She subconsciously knew that it was Zhou Chengguang that day, but she deliberately ignored it. She made herself think that it was Gu Zhe. Chapter 2697. Qin Chen smiled faintly. "This is a normal reaction. There's no need to blame yourself. Qin Mu, I've already applied for a liver source. It may not be available soon, but if I apply now, the chances will be much higher." Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. When Qin Chen's sports car drove to the villa, Zhao Ziyi was also looking for Zhou Chengguang. Zhou Chengguang had disappeared. Just last night, he left the villa with only a small suitcase. The guard said that he was going out for a few days. But Qin Mu knew that he wouldn't be gone for a few days. He must have left. Maybe he had left B City, or maybe he had gone abroad. "I've checked immigration. He didn't leave the country." Zhao Zi sighed. He picked up his phone and kept calling people to find Zhou Chengguang. The last call was to Lan Yu's phone. Lan Yu ran a hotel, so there might be some clues. When Qin Chen heard Lan Yu's voice, his expression loosened slightly, but he quickly returned to normal. Zhao Zi looked around but didn't find any clues. He let out a long sigh. I'll go out and look again to see if his mother's house is there. Wait a minute. Qin Mu stopped him and then asked softly, is his car in the hospital? She remembered that there was a pool of blood on the ground in the hospital that day. Zhou Chongguang's car was also in the parking lot. It had been so many days. Was it still there? If not, did he drive it away? Zhao Zi pursed his thin lips. I'll go and see it now. Qin Mu immediately said, I'll go too. Qin Chen opened the car door and let her get in. Less than an hour later, they stood in the parking lot of the city hospital. Zhou Chongguang's car was no longer there. A white BMW was parked there. However, Qin Mu's gaze fell on the cement floor. There was a small pool of blood there. She slowly squatted down and touched it with her hand. It was still wet. He just left. Her voice was slightly tense. Zhao Zi immediately walked toward the building. I'll go check the surveillance footage. As for Qin Mu, he stood there and looked around. She wanted to find him. Perhaps he hadn't left yet. Perhaps he wasn't feeling well and had stopped at the intersection. However, after searching all over the place, the car was nowhere to be found. Zhao Zi checked the surveillance footage and saw that Zhou Chongguang's car had left 10 minutes ago. That was why the blood on the ground hadn't dried yet. Qin Mu stood in the parking lot and murmured, why did he leave? Why did he leave? Zhao Zi said softly, I called Qin Chen that day. He might have heard it. Qin Chen shrugged. You're too careless. Qin Mu lowered her head. Does he not want to see me that much? She placed her hand on her abdomen and asked softly, Zhao Zi, is my child Zhou Chongguang's? Zhao Zi pursed his lips and looked at Qin Chen. Then his gaze fell on Lan Yu, who was rushing over. Qin Chen was a little confused. Why did he look for this idiot? What could a vegetable do? Lan Yu closed the car door and his gaze fell on Qin Chen's face. He said to Zhao Zi, I've checked all the hotel records. There's no information on Zhou Chongguang's check-in. Of course, I'll ask someone to keep an eye on it. Zhao Zi nodded. Thank you. Then, he looked at Qin Mu and said bitterly, then, who do you want this child to be? Qin Mu was stunned for a moment. Who did she want it to be? At this moment, she actually wanted it to be Zhou Chongguang's. Chapter 2698. She couldn't answer Zhao Zi's words, at least not now. If she wanted to answer, she would rather say it in front of Zhou Chongguang. Actually, Qin Chen was right. It didn't matter who the child belonged to. What mattered was who she loved in her heart. Please forgive her selfishness. If Zhou Chongguang was fine, she would really let it go. But now that he was like this, she couldn't let it go no matter what. Qin Mu suddenly laughed. She cried and laughed. She said loudly to the surroundings, Zhou Chongguang. Where are you? Where are you? Why are you hiding? Qin Chen said that you gave up on yourself, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that you are so great. You have always been so selfish. Zhou Chongguang, come out. I promise, I won't cry for you. I will only slap you. Qin Mu cried so hard that she couldn't control herself. However, she couldn't do anything to him. She still cried, but she wouldn't cry in front of him. She definitely wouldn't. She would really slap him as long as he dared to appear. But she called for so long and cried for so long, but he didn't appear. Qin Chen came over and patted her shoulder. His voice was very gentle. Don't cry. He's not here. He can't hear you even if you cry. Why don't you save your strength and give him 2 hard slaps when you see him? Qin Mu rested her head on his shoulder and bit her lip. Qin Chen, where do you think he will go? He will probably stay in B City. He won't be willing to leave, Qin Chen said with certainty. Thinking about it, Qin Mu was pregnant. How could he bear to leave? No matter who the child belonged to, Zhou Chongguang should know that the child was his, so he had to see the child born. This was Qin Chen's deduction. If it wasn't Zhou Chongguang's, her name would be written backwards. Think about it, if the child wasn't Zhou Chongguang's, he didn't have to run away. Wasn't he just sick? He was just feeling guilty. When he had sex with Qin Mu, Gumei was still alive. It was morally unacceptable for him to do that. Even if he was forced, it was also possible that he was thinking for Qin Mu and was afraid that Qin Mu would feel bad. He put his arm around Qin Mu and walked slowly to the car. Lan Yu stopped him and chuckled. I'll let you know if there's any news. Qin Chen glanced at him. Just tell Zhao Zi. Lan Yu revealed a gentle smile. I don't have much in common with him. Sorry, I don't have anything in common with you. Qin Mu rolled her eyes at him and got into the car. Before he could close the door, Lan Yu held the door and looked at him with a burning gaze. Lan Yu's voice was low. When you called me a vegetable before, you didn't feel like you didn't have anything in common with me. Dr. Qin, or do you like to communicate with vegetables? Then, he wouldn't mind becoming a vegetable again. Lan Yu thought viciously. Qin Chen pursed her lips and glared at Lan Yu. She saw his viciousness, so she sneered and closed the door without saying anything. Lan Yu cried out in pain. His hand was pressed down. Qin Chen opened the door again and smiled at him. If you want to be a vegetable, stand in front of the car and I will fulfill your wish immediately. Lan Yu's face darkened. Although he knew that Qin Chen had a sharp tongue, he was still angered to new heights every time. Chapter 2699. Zhao Zi walked over and looked at Lan Yu. Did you just say that we don't have anything in common? Lan Yu patted the wrinkles on his clothes and glanced at him. Do you think so? Zhao Zi nodded. Actually, I think so too. Think about it, I like women and you like men. Tell me, we have different sexual orientations. How could we have anything in common? This time, Lan Yu's face was completely dark. He was especially annoyed. He was here to help, so why was the whole world so hostile towards him? He wrinkled his nose and got into his car to leave. Zhao Zi also left, the cars drove off one after another, and the parking lot became quiet again. After a minute or so, a man in a black hooded trench coat walked out from a dark hallway. He walked out and quietly looked at the entrance of the parking lot with a hint of pain on his face. He knew that Qin Mu knew the truth. However, he could not face her. He stood for a long time and smoked 2 cigarettes. Then, he carried a small duffel bag and walked out of the hospital. He went to a small soup kitchen. There was no need for identification there, but the conditions were a little bad. A woman in her 40s led him into the dark corridor. The stairs creaked when he stepped on them. If he did not come here himself, Zhou Chongguang would not have known that there was such a place in B City. The woman stopped at the door of a room and opened the door for him. Instantly, a moldy smell rushed out from the door. Zhou Chongguang frowned, but still walked in. The wooden floor creaked as he walked. There were 1 or 2 pieces that were empty. There was a big hole there, and it looked dilapidated. The woman said apologetically, I'll fill it up with bricks later. Mr. Zhou, this is the best room left. It's 200 yuan a night. If you have decided, you can pay the deposit. Zhou Chongguang took out about 10,000 yuan from his wallet and gave it to her. I'll stay for a month, and 3 meals will be included. It's fine as long as it's simple. The woman's wrinkled face immediately relaxed, and then she smiled. Mr. Zhou, you're really generous. Thank you so much. Also, I like silence. Other than delivering food, don't disturb me. Don't insert any advertisements either. Zhou Chongguang coughed violently. The woman's heart ached for him. Mr. Zhou, I won't. You don't look very well, and you're still recuperating. How can you get yourself some messy women? It'll be too troublesome. The more the woman talked, the more excited Zhou Chongguang became. He waved his hand and said, "You may leave." The woman's face stiffened. Gosh, Mr. Zhou is so cool. Just now, he had the aura of a CEO. Mr. Zhou, you must have been an actor before. You've acted as a CEO before? The woman laughed. How could the CEO possibly stay in this shabby house of hers? Just this house alone cost 100 yuan a day. It was in a good location, but there was no sunlight all day long. There was only a bed and a table in the house. It was about 10 square meters. Mr. Zhou was very generous, and his clothes looked very expensive. He didn't look like someone who lived here. But it was fine if he lived here. She would go back and count the money. The woman twisted her waist and walked away. She turned back and winked at him. Mr. Zhou, I'll deliver food in 2 hours. Don't go away. I'll deliver it personally. Zhou Chongguang saw the flash in her eyes and coughed. All right, you may leave. Chapter 2700. The woman closed the door and muttered to herself, "He's really good looking, but he doesn't seem to be in good health." She raised the money in her hand and looked at it one by one with a particularly happy expression. Zhou Chongguang, who was inside the door, slowly pushed open the window of the room. In fact, it was only a small 2-pane window, only the size of 2 notebooks. When the window was opened, dust blew in his face. Zhou Chongguang choked and coughed violently again. After that, he raised his eyes and looked at the skyscraper in front of him. That was the apartment where Qin Mu lived. On the top floor of that building, Qin Mu lived. When night fell, the lights there would illuminate the entire night. Zhou Chongguang smiled slightly. The wind outside the window blew in, carrying bursts of heat waves. Only then did he feel that this hotel was really simple and crude. It didn't even have an air conditioner. However, he didn't care so much. Even if such a place was installed, it probably wouldn't be much more comfortable. He would stay here for as long as he could. Facing the wind, he lit a cigarette and continued to stare at the building quietly. Was Mumu very sad now? She would still be sad for him. This fool wasn't worth it. He had lied to her so many times and broken her heart so many times. Her happiness was clearly in front of her. If she was smart, she would be with Guze. Guze could give her everything a woman should have. Wealth, a handsome and healthy husband, loyalty, and children. Why was she so stupid? Why did she still look for him? Even if he found a liver source, he couldn't rule out whether he could survive. If the liver was rejected, she would still be sad in the end. It was better to be selfish and let her be with Guze. Zhou Chongguang smoked slowly and coughed after a while. However, after coughing, he continued to smoke. However, on the windowsill, he saw some blood on the dust over there. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled in relief. At this point, a little better or a little worse didn't make any difference. After smoking a cigarette, he went to pack his luggage, but when he took out his shirt, he found that there was no closet for him to hang his clothes in, so he had to put the shirt back into his luggage. He lit a cigarette and held it in one hand. He took the key left by the landlady on the table and went out. He bought some daily necessities at a grocery store in the alley. It was the first time for Zhou Chongguang to buy these things, so he couldn't help but ask a few questions. The young woman who was selling these things looked at him 8 or 10 times with a red face and a delicate voice. Zhou Chongguang slowly noticed that and really wanted to ask her if she was sick. With a cigarette in his hand and a bunch of cheap goods in his hand, he slowly walked towards the charity shop. The landlady stood at the door and watched. She turned her head and smiled. "Mr. Zhou, if you want to hang up your clothes, I'll ask my husband to help you pull a strong rope. Your room has a small bathroom, so it's quite convenient." This kind of suite is very reasonable in our area. Zhou Chongguang smoked and looked at her faintly, which made the landlady happy. She shook her body and looked at the young woman at the entrance of the alley. Now, the more she looked at this surnamed Zhou, the more she felt that he had a bearing. He was probably very capable in the past, but now he was just down and out. Chapter 2701. However, there is a saying that a skinny camel is still bigger than a horse. Look at his imposing manner, it's 1,000 times better than the dead man in her house. And that face, he really can make a living anywhere. It's just that his body is a little thin. A green light appeared in the landlady's eyes. Such a man, once he is nourished, he will become a ferocious beast. Thinking of this, she gathered her hair and personally took the wire to go up. She was still wearing the same cheongsam as the female lead in Mood for Love, but her waist was twice as thick as Maggie Cheung's. She swayed her body up and knocked on Zhou Chongguang's door. "Mr. Zhou, let me help you with the rope." Zhou Chongguang looked at her. "Isn't your husband the one who will do it?" "He is not here, I am afraid that you will be in a hurry." The last 3 words were in the landlady's mouth, it was particularly enchanting and fussy. Zhou Chongguang was flashed again. He looked at her and silently took the tool in her hand. "I will do it myself." "How can you do it yourself?" The landlady's eyes were like silk, and her breath seemed to be broken. "Let me do it." She learned from those women in the movies, throwing flirtatious glances, wanting to have an impromptu one-night stand with the tenant. His body was not good, but he could slowly recover. Today, she wanted to have sex with such a good-looking man. Besides, Mr. Zhou probably needs the comfort of a gentle woman like her in his current state. So the landlady's wishful thinking made Zhou Chongguang retreat again and again. "I will do it myself." "I will help you, do it." The landlady did not give up. At this moment, there was a heavy sound of footsteps on the stairs, and then a man in his 50s appeared. He looked like a laborer outside. He looked at the landlady. "Ah, Xiang, what are you going to do for this guy?" The landlady was still a pretty boy just now, but now it was completely dark. She held her newly combed hair with her hand and said, "Spoilsport." Then, she turned around and gave her husband a fake smile. "I'm getting the clothesline." Then she shook her body and went downstairs. The man came over and looked at the things in Zhou Chongguang's hands. He smiled. "This woman is too talkative. Don't mind her." "What kind of work do you want me to do?" Zhou Chongguang didn't know how to do these things. He had been forced by that woman before, so he smiled and said, "Clothesline." The man nodded and walked in. He took the things in his hands and started to work quickly. As he worked, he said, "Actually, I know about my woman's problem. She likes good-looking men, but I'm not worried." Zhou Chongguang felt that men were straightforward, so he stood aside and handed over a cigarette. The man lowered his head and lit it up. He took a puff and looked at it with one hand. "Good cigarette. It's not cheap, right?" Zhou Chongguang smiled. "No matter how expensive it is, it's for smoking." The man smiled. "That's true." Then he continued the previous topic. "I know about my woman's problem. Don't be fooled by her rough appearance, her heart is not rough at all. She always thinks that she is a great beauty and is dazzled by good-looking men. What I'm not worried about is that with her looks, there probably won't be any good-looking men who can enter her eyes. So let her be." When he said this, even Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but laugh. This couple was quite interesting. Chapter 2702. Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but think that if he and Qin Mu were such an ordinary couple, they wouldn't have been separated in the first place. If he was like this man and used his strength to eat, Gumei wouldn't be so obsessed with him. However, would Qin Mu like him again? He shook his head and smiled, laughing at himself. The man did the work very neatly and was done very quickly. He even helped him put a towel or something in the small washroom that could only accommodate one person. After the man was done, he also finished smoking the cigarette that Zhou Chongguang gave him. He smiled and said, "Look for me if there's anything. It's the same to look for my woman." He added, "When it comes to you, I'm 100% assured." Zhou Chongguang smiled and said, "You don't mind?" "Yes, yes." There were some things that were not convenient to say. The man was sweating all over and smelled of hormones. He smiled and said, "We've been married for so long. This kind of thing is actually her hobby. It's up to her. As long as she's happy, it's fine." After saying that, he went downstairs, probably to look for his woman. Zhou Chongguang heard him say, "As long as she's happy, it's fine." He actually felt that this sentence was very philosophical. He bent down and opened his luggage. He slowly hung up his shirt and trousers one by one and put them in a small corner. After he was done, he actually felt that it was very good. It looked neat and had the feeling of a small home. He rubbed his chin with his thumb and smiled. He actually felt that such a place was like home. "Zhou Chongguang, is this your final home?" He stood by the window and looked outside. He stood there for a long time. After smoking about 2 cigarettes, he really couldn't stop coughing. He took out his phone from his pocket and turned it on. Messages came one after another, one after the other. The phone vibrated so much that it was about to explode. Most of them were from Zhao Zi. There were a few that he didn't recognize. However, his eyes lingered on Qin Mu's number. She called him a total of 3 times, he knew her very well. This was a little pride of hers. He knew a little about Qin Mu's character. If she called him and he didn't answer, she would never keep calling. She wasn't a person who forced things. Would she give up in the end? Zhou Chongguang stood there and watched the night slowly fall. The lights of the city slowly lit up every corner of the city, but not where he was now. The place where he stood seemed to be abandoned by the city. He heard that it would be demolished in half a year. At that time, he didn't know if he would still be there. Zhou Chongguang chuckled. His abdomen was in pain. He turned around and took out a painkiller from his suitcase. When he wanted to drink some water, he realized that there was none. He frowned and was about to go downstairs to buy some bottled water, but the landlady had already swayed her thick waist and posed at the door. "Mr. Zhou, it's time to eat." Zhou Chongguang took the fast food from her hand. It looked like the kind that cost 20 yuan per serving. He took out 200 yuan and gave it to her. "Buy me a few bottles of water." The landlady was very easy to talk to since he was rich. However, she was very calculative. After thinking for a while, she smiled and said, "I'll get a kettle to boil water and a cup. It's healthy. It's not good to drink cold water all the time." Zhou Chongguang didn't have much of an opinion. He could make do with anything now. Chapter 2703. Zhou Chongguang took the lunchbox and sat at the table. He opened the lunchbox, untied the hot bag, and took a sip of the medicine. Although he didn't have the appetite to eat such food, he still managed to eat half of it. After eating, he sat on the bed and smoked silently. It was very simple here. He had to sit on the bed to eat, and there was no TV or any entertainment. Other than smoking, he couldn't find anything else to do. When the landlady came in, she saw that Zhou Chongguang was smoking. She didn't say anything at first, but when she helped him boil the water, she couldn't help but frown. "Mr. Zhou, you don't look so good. You should smoke less." Zhou Chongguang glanced at her with his long and narrow eyes. He flicked the cigarette butt and didn't say anything. The landlady felt that he had a good accent when he smoked. In the future, he would probably be someone. She also felt that he didn't look like a pretty boy actor anymore. She slowly didn't dare to have any improper thoughts about Zhou Chongguang. He narrowed his eyes and looked strange. Some people didn't need to say anything. They just had that kind of aura that made people unconsciously lower their heads. When the landlady left, she added, "Smoke less. My place isn't very good at fire protection." Zhou Chongguang glanced at her and she immediately closed the door. After she left, Zhou Chongguang felt that the world was a little more peaceful. He lay on the bed. The old cotton sheets on the bed were very uncomfortable, but he still made do with it. Under the moonlight, he looked at the high-end apartment not far away. Just like this, it could be considered as watching over her. At this moment, his phone rang again. His eyes were still looking at the night outside. His hand gripped the phone tightly and didn't move for a long time. After a long time, he picked up the phone and looked at it. It was Zhao Zi. He thought for a moment and still picked up the phone. Zhao Zi went straight to the point. "Zhou Chongguang, where are you?" Without waiting for him to answer, he said again, "Don't tell me you're sleeping under the bridge." Zhou Chongguang laughed hoarsely. "Of course not. I'm drinking red wine and listening to music. It's very good." "Who are you trying to fool?" Zhao Zi's voice was quite serious. "Qin Mu knows the truth. You were the one who had sex with her that day. Chongguang, you're a man now, so don't be so pretentious. Stand out if you have the guts. At most, it's just a woman who doesn't want you." Zhou Chongguang said hoarsely, Guze is more suitable for her." "You motherfucker. If Guze was suitable for her, why didn't you divorce him? Also, it wasn't Guze who made her pregnant. What right do you have to let Guze be her father?" Zhao Zi's words were like a bamboo tube being poured upside down. Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. "Guze loves her and doesn't mind. Qin Mu loves you too. What if she doesn't mind?" Zhao Zi's voice softened. "Do you know how badly she cried today? Think about how she's pregnant and worried about you. If you're a man, get out here. Whether you live or die, there's still Qin Chen, right? He even saved your son, so why can't he save you?" I deserve it." Zhou Chongguang let out a long sigh. Zhao Zi sneered. "Then you should live even more. A scourge lives for 1,000 years, right? You've only lived for 30 years. Zhou Chongguang almost choked when he heard that. Zhao Zi heard his voice and didn't have the mood to joke anymore. He said seriously, "Chongguang, I'm very worried about you. Come back. I'm very worried about you outside." Chapter 2704. Zhou Chongguang smiled and didn't say anything. He looked at the lights of the apartment outside the window and felt a little conflicted. He was tempted by Zhao Zi's words, but so what? He still didn't have absolute confidence in tomorrow. He was annoyed and wanted to smoke, but after lighting the cigarette, he was afraid. If, in case, he could survive, with this thought in mind, his eyes looked at the cigarette butt, and he hesitated. The red spots looked like the blood he had coughed up before, and it was like a devil haunting his eyes. But in the end, he put down the cigarette butt, threw it on the ground, and stepped on it to extinguish it. He couldn't sleep that night. In addition to the heat, there were also the pervasive mosquitoes. The environment was so bad that even a person like Zhou Chongguang, who was unafraid of death, found it unbearable. He couldn't sleep, so he lay down and turned on his phone to look at Qin Mu's photo. He looked at it for the whole night, and it seemed that the long night wasn't so hard to bear. At dawn, he finally couldn't bear it anymore and took a nap. When he woke up, it was already 8 in the morning. When he opened his eyes, the room was dark, and there was only a trace of sunlight coming through the window. He got up and walked over to stand. He smelled the dust, and there was already a wave of heat in the early morning. He thought that maybe he should go to the grocery store later and buy a small electric fan. Otherwise, he couldn't live. He looked up and saw a blue sky. Only this place seemed to be forgotten in the corner of the world, quiet and dilapidated. At this time, there was a knock on the door, and the voice of the landlady came from outside. "Mr. Zhou, it's time for breakfast. Zhou Chongguang walked over to open the door, took the bag from her hand, and said lightly, "Thank you." Then, he closed the door. The landlady was disappointed for a while. She wanted to say a few more words. She wanted to tell him that she just got the news this morning that this place was about to be demolished. If he didn't stay for a month, she would refund the money. But this man was so cold, she wouldn't refund the money, absolutely not. Inside, Zhou Chongguang opened the bag, ate a bun, drank a bag of soy milk, and left one bun on the table. He sat for a while and then walked outside. The landlady watched him coming down from downstairs. Although she was angry, she couldn't help but ask, "Where are you going?" "Go buy a fan," Zhou Chongguang said lightly. The landlady's face stiffened. How could she not know what kind of conditions she had here? He licked his face and smiled. "How could I let Mr. Zhou buy it?" Thus, Zhou Chongguang stood still. The woman looked at him. He looked at the woman. No one made a sound. After a long time, the landlady squeezed out a stiff smile. "Didn't you say you were going to buy a fan? Hurry up and go. Also, be careful. Don't touch the girl from the grocery store at the intersection. If you touch her body, you'll be finished. You won't be able to get down." The landlady's words were unpleasant. Zhou Chongguang smiled and didn't say anything. He went out without saying anything. The landlady stood at the door and looked at him from afar. When she saw Zhou Chongguang came back quickly, she put her hand on her forehead and smiled. Mr. Zhou was such an experienced person. How could he like Ru Hua at the entrance of the village? When Zhou Chongguang approached, she smiled sincerely. "Mr. Zhou, how about I help you adjust the fan?" Chapter 2705. The woman was quite boring. After a while, she sighed and said, "Forget it." Zhou Chongguang smiled and went upstairs. In a place like this, one day at a time, he just wanted to live a peaceful life. However, his heart was not at ease. Because he was worried about Qin Mu, he was afraid that she would be worried and sad. After playing with the electric fan, Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but look up at the building outside. After thinking about it, he decided to go out for a walk. Maybe he could see her from afar. When he went downstairs again, the landlady was a little surprised. She wanted to wink at him again, but finally knew that it was not appropriate, so she smiled. Zhou Chongguang also smiled. In fact, the landlady was a good woman. She was a little cute. He walked out slowly and took out a cigarette. He didn't light it, but just put it on his lips. Unexpectedly, when he passed by the grocery store at the intersection, he saw a scene that hurt his eyes. In Zhou Chongguang's mind, the landlord's woman's man was hugging the grocery store's Shishir, aka Ru Hua. His rough face even leaned over and kissed Shishir's face. Shishir immediately covered her face, smiled shyly, and twisted her body to walk inside. The curtain was lifted, and she went in. As for the man, he grinned and waved his hand as he followed them in. They didn't notice Zhou Chongguang, probably because they were too engrossed. Not long after, the man and the woman's heavy panting could be heard from inside. Their voices were as loud as a cow's. Zhou Chongguang turned around and saw the landlady sitting there from a distance, holding a nose plate in her hand, thinking about something. He thought that she might be thinking about a good life in the future. But she never thought that such an honest man like him would also have a woman outside, and she was fooling around in the daytime under his nose. He stared at her and sighed in his heart. Was his muumuu also so stupid when he didn't know it? Of course, Zhou Chongguang wouldn't stand out. There were some things that were better left unknown than knowing. If he didn't know, perhaps his life would be over, just like that man who always tolerated women. His heart was heavy, and it was only when he walked out of the alley that he felt a little better. Turning another corner, he slowly walked to the entrance of Qin Mu's apartment. He stood quietly by the tree. This angle was still a blind spot. No one could see him. Perhaps it was because of his longing that Qin Mu actually appeared. Half an hour later, she walked out of the apartment with an umbrella in her hand and walked slowly. There was no one else beside her. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at her greedily. She has lost weight. Although she was pregnant, she had lost a lot of weight, and she had lost a lot of weight. She walked slowly, and he noticed that she was holding a stack of paper in her hand. Then she came to a tree, where something was posted. His heart tightened, and there was a metallic taste in his throat. She was posting a missing person notice. Because he was hiding, and because he didn't live in a big hotel, she used this method to find him. His Mumu really knew him. She knew that he would find a place close to her, so she posted it near his home. For a moment, he really felt very distressed. Her figure stood in the summer heat for 2 to 3 hours. He could even see the sweat on her forehead. He clenched his fists, which was a great torture to him at this moment. Chapter 2706. As for Qin Mu, he was always there. He was either standing, squatting, or bending over. He kept scrolling through those missing person notices seriously. Occasionally, there would be some notices on those trees that were looking for dogs. Most of the dogs that were lost were in heat and had gone to find a mate. Zhou Chongguang looked at his notice and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Mumu must have done it on purpose. Even when he was angry, he was still so cute. He stared at it for a long time and quietly tore off one of his notices. He should keep the one that was looking for a dog. He tilted his head and looked at his Mumu. She was still reading in the distance, as if she didn't know fatigue. Zhou Chongguang frowned. How did Qin Chen take care of her? Why did he let her come out like this for half a day? He stepped back, walked to a place where there was no one, and called Qin Chen. He didn't expect that the piece of paper between his fingers would float out. It kept floating until it reached Qin Mu's feet. Zhou Chongguang called Qin Chen. Where are you? Qin Chen was sitting on the sofa in the apartment, comfortably eating iced watermelon. He was wearing a set of Armani casual clothes, which was completely different from Zhou Chongguang's current situation. Looking at his phone, Qin Chen smiled and said, "I'm in the apartment." Then his smile became even more obvious. Do you feel sorry for a pregnant woman? Zhou Chongguang was a little angry. How can you let a pregnant woman do this kind of thing? You're a doctor, don't you know the danger? Qin Chen's smile became cold. If the child's father doesn't feel sorry for her, why should I feel sorry for her? Besides, Zhou Chongguang, who are you to call me the son-in-law of the Qin family? Sorry, you've been divorced a long time ago, and you're Qin Mu's current boyfriend? Sorry, her current boyfriend is Gu Zhe. His words made Zhou Chongguang speechless. Qin Chen continued, if you're a man, go and take her back. I don't want to raise a child for you. Then Qin Chen said venomously, don't worry, a scourge lives for 1,000 years. You won't die. Zhou Chongguang was petrified on the spot, another scourge that would last for 1,000 years. Was he a failure as a human? Qin Mu smiled again. If you don't go out, you'll regret it. Zhou Chongguang hung up the phone. In the entire Qin family, Qin Chen was the most difficult to deal with. He really didn't know how Lan Yu could fall in love with Qin Chen. She didn't even know his gender. But now that he thought about it, Qin Chen still thought that it was cuter to be a man. If Lan Yu knew that he was a woman, he would probably change his mind. It was one thing for a woman to make herself look like a man, but she was also so poisonous. Zhou Chongguang was about to turn around when a soft voice came from behind. Zhou Chongguang, is that you? His body froze. It was Qin Mu behind him. Her voice was soft. He couldn't mistake it for someone else. Zhou Chongguang's thin facial muscles contracted rapidly. He suppressed it for a long time before he turned around. He didn't know how close he was to her. He didn't dare to turn around. How could he see her in this state? He wanted to leave, but his body was hugged by a pair of soft arms. The umbrella fell to the ground and rolled twice. Zhou Chongguang. Don't you dare to leave. Her whole body was stuck to him, and her voice was a little choked. If you dare to leave, I'll abort the child. Don't tell me it's Guze's. I know it's you. His body became even more stiff. After a long time, he said hoarsely, you won't bear to. Chapter 2707. If you dare to leave, I will. She hugged him even harder and said in a soft voice, as if she was about to cry, Zhou Chongguang, really, if you dare to do this, I will dare not to have this child, and we will have nothing to do with each other in the future. He sighed in his heart. How scared was she to say such a thing? He could see how much she loved this child, but in order to keep him, she said such a thing. Mumu, why do you have to do this? Isn't it good to start over? He murmured, looking at her clenched hands. Qin Mu shook her head desperately. I want to start over, but you won't let me. Zhou Chongguang, if you were fine, I could forget you, but why do you treat yourself like this? You know that I won't be able to let you go. She raised her little fist and hit him hard on the back to vent the anger in her heart. As for him, he let her be angry, but her strength was getting weaker and weaker. In the end, she hugged him and cried. She cried like a child. She didn't care if she was seen or laughed at by others. The people who passed by looked at them, as well as the signs on the trees and the signs on the dogs. Zhou Chongguang had no choice but to pat the back of her hand. All right, Mumu, don't cry. People will laugh at you. Getting pregnant before marriage. The man ran away, and people will laugh even more, she said awkwardly behind him. As for him, he was both angry and amused. There was nothing he could do about it. Just as he was about to say something, the body of the person behind him fell softly. He was shocked. He immediately turned to the side and picked up her limp body. Her face was so pale that there was no trace of blood. She must have suffered from heatstroke. Zhou Chongguang supported her with one hand and stopped a taxi with the other. After getting in the car, he immediately called Qin Chen. Qin Mu has suffered from heatstroke. I'm going to Xingyuan Hospital now. Come here immediately. He didn't trust anyone else except the sharp-tongued Qin Chen. On the other side, Qin Chen cursed inwardly. He quickly stood up and walked toward the door. The driver drove very fast. This place was very close to Xingyuan, so they arrived very quickly. In the car, the windows were all open, and the air conditioner was on. After the ventilation, Qin Mu felt a little better. She woke up for a while, and then fell asleep again, probably because she was too tired. Her face was still very pale. Half an hour later, Qin Chen returned to the VIP ward after discussing with the obstetrics director for a while. He saw Zhou Chongguang sitting by the bed. He walked in and wrinkled his nose. Zhou Chongguang, how long has it been since you last showered? Qin Mu must have fainted because of you. Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. He had been cursed again. Qin Chen bent over and helped Qin Mu tidy up the quilt. He asked softly, what's your plan? Zhou Chongguang smiled. Take good care of her. I'm asking you what's your plan? Qin Chen tilted his head, and his eyes were especially sharp. Then he got up and walked toward the door. Let's talk. Zhou Chongguang's eyes stayed on Qin Mu's face for a long time, and then he reluctantly followed him out. In the corridor, Qin Chen leaned against the wall and looked at the sunlight outside the window. When Zhou Chongguang came over, he looked at him and said softly, if you die, Qin Mu's child will also be lost. Zhou Chongguang was stunned. Chapter 2708. Zhou Chongguang looked at her, his eyes straight. Qin Chen softly spat out a few words, hypnotism, do you know? He said softly, I'll give you 3 days. If you haven't made up your mind, I'll hypnotize her. Qin Chen took out a long and thin cigarette from his pocket. He lit it up delicately and took a puff. He turned his head and smiled. Medicine is so advanced that anyone can live without it. I'll erase that part of your memory. If necessary, I'll replace it with Guze's. Everyone will be happy. Guze will also be rushing to take care of your child. Zhou Chongguang wanted to say, "That's very good," but the words stuck in his mouth for a long time and he still couldn't say them. Qin Chen moved his chin. "She's in there. Just take a look and leave. If you haven't made up your mind, don't stay by her side. It'll be more troublesome to erase her memory." Zhou Chongguang's throat tightened. "Okay, I'll think about it." Qin Chen smiled and looked at him with his beautiful and narrow eyes. "I really won't force you, Zhou Chongguang." With that, he punched Zhou Chongguang's beautiful chin. "If I knew you were so weak, I wouldn't have come back and told Qin Mu the truth," he said fiercely. "My kindness has been fed to the dogs." Zhou Chongguang's face stiffened inch by inch. However, he still entered the ward quietly. Qin Chen was still smoking. He rarely smoked, but he was really annoyed at this time. Qin Mu was very silly. If a man didn't have the courage to turn back, so what if he forced himself to come back? If she wanted him to come back, she had to make him want to come back. What was the point of having a man who didn't want to live anymore? He raised his head and looked at the sunlight outside. He squinted his eyes slightly. The contours of his jaw and collarbone were extremely pleasing to the eye. At least, when Lan Yu walked over, his throat tightened and his whole body tensed up. After such a long time, he still had high hopes for Qin Chen. He walked over slowly and stood in front of Qin Chen. He looked at him and asked, "Have you found him?" "People are alive, but the heart is dead. It's better not to." Qin Chen smiled. Lan Yu leaned over. "Then tell me, am I dead or alive?" Qin Chen lowered his gaze and sneered, "You're alive now, but if you dare to come any closer, I guarantee that you'll be crippled even if you don't die." "It sounds like Dr. Qin is very powerful." Lan Yu's voice was low, and his lips were close to Qin Chen's ear. It was a very intimate scene. Qin Chen chuckled and moved his hand forward with the cigarette between his fingers. Lan Yu's tall body suddenly collapsed, and he was almost foaming at the mouth. "You're overestimating yourself." Qin Chen turned the ring on his hand back to its original position, kicked Lan Yu's body, and left without hesitation. And Lan Yu's eyes were looking in the direction where he left, so cruel. He swore that he would take down this guy and force him to serve him once. In the ward, Zhou Chongguang sat by the bed and held Qin Mu's hand. How long had it been since he last touched her hand? It seemed to have been 2 or 3 months. How long had it been since he looked at her like this? It seemed to have been even longer. He looked at her greedily, and there was a taste of blood in his throat. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't say a word. She was lying here so fragile, so helpless. He wanted to be healthy so that he could give her the happiness of the world. But if he was healthy, she probably wouldn't forgive him. Chapter 2709. Hot tears fell, drop by drop, onto her hands. But she didn't know that she had been asleep. Zhou Chongguang lowered his face and touched her hand gently. For a long time, when Qin Mu woke up, Zhou Chongguang was no longer there. Only Qin Chen accompanied her in the big ward. When she opened her eyes, there was a tear at the corner of her eye. She said softly, "Qin Chen, I dreamed of Zhou Chongguang." Qin Chen held her hand and listened to her continue, "I dreamed that he was sitting next to me." "Qin Chen, he came here, didn't he?" With that, Qin Mu closed her eyes weakly. For her, meeting Zhou Chongguang was like a fantasy. Now that she woke up, she felt it was unreal. Qin Chen pursed his lips, "He sent you to the hospital. Then why did he leave?" Qin Mu asked softly. Qin Chen looked at her, "He said he would think about it." "Qin Mu, I promise that no matter what his decision is, I will not give up his life, okay? Another tear rolled down from the corner of Qin Mu's eye. Qin Chen sighed and wiped it for her. He said softly, Qin Mu, don't cry. I believe Zhou Chongguang will understand. He changed the topic, but now you are going to forgive him. Don't you think it is too easy to forgive him? Girl, where is your modesty? Qin Mu turned her head away angrily, it was eaten by a dog. Qin Chen nodded in agreement, I think so too. With that, he sighed, Gu Zhe has also been here. He is outside. Do you want to see him? Qin Mu opened her eyes slightly and looked at Qin Chen. After a long time, she said softly, let him in. No matter what, she was the one who had wronged Gu Zhe. As for Gu Zhe lying to her, she thought he probably had no choice. She wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for her. It was rare enough for a man to be willing to help raise someone else's child, let alone become a father. Qin Chen opened the door and went out. He called Gu Zhe and left to give them some private space to solve their emotional problems. In fact, he could see that if the child was Gu Zhe's, there was nothing wrong with Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu and Gu Zhe might really become a couple. However, the heavens were not on their side. Zhou Chongguang's last shot was successful. Heaven's will. Qin Chen sighed. Inside the door, Gu Zhe slowly walked out and closed the door. When he saw that Qin Mu wanted to get up, he quickly walked over, supported her body, and scolded, what do you want to do in such a situation? Qin Mu looked at him blankly. Gu Zhe sighed. I know. Her lips moved slightly. She wanted to say something, but she was stopped by Gu Zhe. He said softly, Qin Mu, you didn't do anything wrong to me. I should be the one saying sorry. He looked at her and said softly, I knew about Zhou Chongguang a long time ago. I have you in my heart. I always thought that this decision was good for you, but I didn't know your true feelings. Maybe it's because I knew your feelings that I didn't dare to tell you. This is my selfishness. Qin Mu shook her head. It's not your fault. It's my fault for making you sad. Gu Zhe reached out and wiped away her tears gently. His movements were unbelievably gentle. He looked at her and said softly, Qin Mu, no matter what decision you make, I will wait. Qin Mu looked at him and suddenly felt very sad. She felt that she had let this man down. Chapter 27:10. If it wasn't for the fact that he was Gu Mei's brother on that night by the sea, they might have been together a long time ago. However, Qin Mu's thoughts at that time were different from now. She was much more open-minded now. She looked at Gu Zhe and smiled. Gu Zhe, I really owe you. How many 8 years could a person have? How many times could a person love like this? But no matter how apologetic she was, she still had to say sorry to him. I'm sorry, Gu Zhe. Because there's someone else in my heart, I can't give you happiness. Maybe I'll be happy if we're together, but you won't. She sat up slowly and hugged him despite his resistance. Gu Zhe, you deserve a better girl, she said softly. And she was already full of wounds. It wasn't because she was pregnant with Zhou Chongguang's child, but because she had always been thinking about someone. Gu Zhe didn't move and just hugged her. His heart was wet and warm, and he couldn't describe the feeling. There was heartache, but there was also relief. Qin Mu had let go of him, so he should let go of her too, no matter how hard it was. He was a man, so he couldn't be like a little girl, right? So he smiled, reached out and gently stroked her long hair. Okay. But Qin Mu, I want to be the child's godfather, or I won't return Xuemu to you. She was stunned. I haven't decided if I want to be with him, she said seriously. Gu Zhe reached out and knocked her head. Are you silly? If you break up with me, won't you find another man? Qin Mu said, those are two different things. Gu Zhe looked at her very seriously. After a while, he reached out and touched her head. It's not burnt. Qin Mu was furious. I'm not burnt. Well, no. He smiled lightly. That's good. No matter what you decide, I'll support you. Also, if you can't eat, you can call me at any time to cook for you. If I do this, you won't be able to find a girlfriend. Qin Mu smiled weakly. It doesn't seem very good. Gu Zei's smile deepened. I just wanted to say it, before I found a girlfriend. Qin Mu acknowledged with an oh. He supported her and let her lie down again. His large palm gently caressed the hair on her forehead, feeling a little reluctant. Qin Mu didn't say anything, nor did she stop him. Gu Zei smiled and finally withdrew his hand. Some people, the more you want to catch them, the more you can't. After so many years of entanglement, he had learned a word, leave it to fate. Love wasn't first come, first served, and it wasn't something that could be obtained just by persevering, just like him and Qin Mu. When Gu Zei walked out, Qin Chen was at the door. He tilted his head and asked, he left? Yes. Go back and cook some porridge for her. Gu Zei lit a cigarette, took a puff, and smiled. Sometimes, loving someone is like smoking. It's not easy to quit. He needed time. Qin Chen looked in the direction of the door. What does Qin Mu think? Gu Zei looked at him, and there was a certain meaning in his eyes. Qin Chen smiled faintly. Pretend I didn't ask. With that, he went forward and hugged Gu Zei. Gu Zei, thank you for taking care of my sister. From the bottom of his heart, he approved of Gu Zei more, but Qin Mu loved that bastard Zhou Chongguang. What could he do? Is that a comfort? Gu Zei didn't push him away, but looked into Qin Chen's eyes. Chapter 27:11. But that kind of masculinity was very charming. Even a straight man like Gu Zei had to admit that Qin Chen was particularly attractive. It was the kind of serious and abstinent aura. Didn't that slut, Lan Yu, like him like that? From the corner of his eye, Gu Zei saw that the slut had come. He smiled. Not only did he not let go of Qin Chen, but he also made Lan Yu think that he had kissed Qin Chen. The volcano was probably about to erupt. Gu Zei thought a little naughtily. Today was a day that was not very good. But now he was in a better mood. He left briskly, leaving Qin Chen to deal with that slut. As soon as Gu Zei left, Lan Yu walked over and straightened Qin Chen's body. His eyes searched carefully. Qin Chen pushed him away. His expression was cold. Mr. Lan, be careful of your image. Lan Yu's expression was very ugly. It was as if he had caught his wife cheating on someone. His face darkened. You let him kiss you? What kiss me? Qin Chen looked at him. Your legs are not good, and now your brain is not good either. I'll recommend you to Director Zhang of the neurosurgery department for an X-ray, but just as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed forcefully. His lips were hot and burning, and the kiss was rough. It was as if a layer of Qin Chen's skin would be rubbed off. He struggled a few times but could not break free. So, he simply leaned against the wall and let him kiss. And Lan Yu kissed passionately. He did not care about anything else. He did not notice that a young nurse was taking pictures with her mobile phone in the distance. That kiss photo was first widely circulated in WeChat Moments. Later, it was forcefully published by the mainstream media. In just half a day, the scandal of the president of the Grand Hyatt Hotel and the third son of the Qin family was spreading all over the place. No, this was not a scandal. It was already a fact. After the kiss, Lan Yu couldn't help but loosen his grip on Qin Chen. At this moment, Qin Chen felt a sharp pain on his cheeks. He took out his phone and looked at the camera. Holy shit, both sides of his face were bruised. Lan Yu was a beast. How long had it been since he had kissed a woman? He could still kiss a man like this, and so intensely. Lan Yu just looked at him, his breathing still erratic. How is it? What do you mean? Qin Chen looked at him and sneered, don't think too much. Lan Yu also sneered, you're not interested in me. Why were you kissing so happily just now? I'm sorry, the bruise on my face is the evidence of you forcing yourself on me. Qin Chen didn't take it to heart and said indifferently. It didn't seem like he was complaining, but more like he was stating the facts. Lan Yu frowned. You dare say that you didn't kiss me back just now? Qin Chen glared at him. Do you want me to say it in detail? Say how did you? But before he had a chance to finish, Qin Chen had already stepped on him. Lan Yu couldn't help but let go of him. If you dare to mention this again, I'll beat you until you look for your teeth on the ground. Qin Chen threw down a threat. Lan Yu chuckled. With your thin arms and legs? Qin Chen turned his head and looked at him quietly. Beating up a vegetable is more than enough to mourn. Lan Yu was a little embarrassed. Don't call me a vegetable in the future. Qin Chen narrowed his eyes. Then I'll call you, a vegetable with erectile dysfunction, Lan Yu, I'm so angry. He watched Qin Chen leave and prepared to leave himself. Chapter 27:12. Karate? Lan Yu looked at her. The nurse nodded hard. Yes. No one in our hospital can beat Dr. Qin. Lan Yu didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed and looked at the direction where Qin Chen left. You don't mean what you say. The nurse hesitated for a moment, but still took out her phone and opened her WeChat moments. Mr. Lan, you should keep a low profile in the hospital in the future. Everyone knows that you kissed Dr. Qin by force. She gave him the phone. Lan Yu took it, glanced at it casually, and then curled up. Who took it? It was really good. The inside and outside were clear, and the body was very close. The picture was very real. Hot. He looked at it for a long time, then added her on WeChat with the phone and sent it to her. The nurse blushed. Could it be that Mr. Lan liked both men and women? However, Lan Yu's actions soon dispelled her dream. Lan Yu sent the photo to Qin Chen with a message. How was the photo? I heard that you know karate and you are a master. You don't mean what you say. You like my kiss. He sent many messages in a row. The nurse next to him was stunned. Damn, how could he be so shameless? Lan Yu ignored her and lit a cigarette with one hand. As he smoked, the corners of his mouth curved into a slight smile. After 10 minutes of bombardment, Qin Chen finally replied, frowny face, next time, I will make you look for your teeth all over the floor. Lan Yu thought for a moment and replied. As long as I have a tongue, it doesn't matter if I have teeth or not. The nurse was impressed. Lan Yu threw her phone to her. Thanks. The nurse stopped him. Mr. Lan, this photo has been forwarded by the mainstream media. Don't you need to do PR? At this time, Lan Yu fixed his eyes on her and smiled charmingly. PR? Why? If the whole country knows, Qin Chen won't be able to marry a wife, right? The nurse stammered, you can't marry her either. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lan Yu's voice became gentle. Who said that? I can marry your Dr. Qin. Nurse, fuck. The latest news was that CEO Blue was serious. Just as she was about to burst out in joy, Lan Yu said faintly with a cigarette in his hand, that photo just now was taken by you, right? You've gotten yourself into big trouble, so you're here to plead for me? The nurse stopped in her tracks and turned around to look at Lan Yu. She gulped and said, Mr. Lan, I know you won't argue with me, right? I won't, but Qin Chen will. He smiled. If he comes looking for you, just tell him that I asked you to do it, that I ordered you to do it. The little nurse learned his shamelessness very quickly and answered quickly, then Dr. Qin will go to Mr. Lan, and Mr. Lan can force another kiss. Very smart. Lan Yu praised her a little. At this time, the nurse reminded him in a low voice, but Dr. Qin will look for you all over the floor. It won't affect the kiss, but it will affect the beauty and the city. Lan Yu thought about it and felt a little embarrassed. It seemed so. If he was really a karate master, he, who had been in a vegetative state, would probably be smashed into pieces if he was thrown hard. It was a little scary to think about it. The nurse nodded hard and said in a dramatic manner, "You can only outsmart him." Lan Yu repeated, "Outsmart him." Chapter 27:13. Lan Yu's eyes were a little unpredictable. "Do you have a grudge against Dr. Qin?" The nurse smiled and said, "No, I just hope that Mr. Lan and Dr. Qin can be happy." Lan Yu looked at her for a long time and said, "You really have a heavy taste." With that, he waved his hand, indicating that it was none of her business. The nurse breathed a sigh of relief and immediately ran away. Lan Yu smiled and left first. Gu Zhe was infatuated. He came again in the afternoon. Not only did he bring Qin Mu's food, but he also cooked for Qin Chen. The food was delicious. After eating, Qin Chen looked at Gu Zhe seriously and said, "Have you ever thought about making do with me?" Gu Zhe looked at Qin Chen and said, "Basically, I am straight. It is unlikely that I will marry a man in this life." Qin Chen touched his lower lip elegantly and looked at Qin Mu. "Look at what a good chef you have ruined." Then he looked at Gu Zhe with a smile and said, "Actually, I don't mind marrying you." Gu Zhe's face darkened. Qin Chen continued to say as if nothing had happened, "Otherwise, I can also restore the appearance of a woman. Well, I should not be any worse than Qin Mu." He leaned over and said, "Gu Zhe, what do you think?" Gu Zhe touched his lower lip and looked at him sideways. "Dr. Qin, for a meal, you abandoned the special hobby that you have cultivated for more than 20 years? Isn't it too casual? If I get tired of eating, I will abandon you." Qin Chen said it as if it was a matter of course, and he did not look guilty at all. Gu Zhe nodded and said, "I don't know if Lan Yu can let you be a woman for once if he practices cooking hard." Qin Chen heard the threat in his words and snorted coldly, "You dare to say it? You know it." Gu Zhe smiled. "I'm not a talkative person, but I don't want a man with a woman's face to come to my room in the middle of the night just to have a meal in the future." Qin Chen was deeply shocked. After Gu Zhe left, he looked at Qin Mu. "Am I that bad?" Qin Mu was a little sad in her heart, but her mood was much better after hearing this. She smiled weakly, "Now there are more women who like you." Qin Chen rubbed his chin and nodded. "That's true. He has no foresight." Qin Mu smiled. Qin Chen reached out and cupped her head. "Eat more. Isn't it just a man? The child is the most important." Qin Mu nodded obediently. After eating some, she said in a low voice, "I'm still afraid that something will happen to him." She only stayed in the hospital for a day and then went home. She didn't call Zhou Chongguang because she had her pride. However, one day later, Qin Mu did something that Zhou Chongguang didn't expect. In a simple room, Zhou Chongguang stood in front of the window and looked at the luxurious apartment not far away. The specks of starlight warmed his heart. He held a cigarette in his hand, but he didn't light it. He remembered the phone call with the hospital director today. "Mr. Zhou, I'm sorry. We still haven't found a kidney source." The director's voice was very hoarse and he didn't seem to be in a good mood. "It's okay." Zhou Chongguang was calm. However, at this moment, he felt a little guilty as he looked at the specks of starlight. "Qin Mu, how can I turn back? I can't even give you the most basic happiness. Without a liver source, I don't even know how long I can live. Do I want you to die slowly with me?" Chapter 27:14. But he also knew that if he didn't show up and go back, she would also be in pain. Zhou Chongguang was in a dilemma. He looked at her with a burning gaze, and his Adam's apple kept moving. His eyes were filled with desire. If he could do it all over again, he was willing to give Qin Mu everything beautiful, everything that a girl wanted, everything that she wanted, he would give her. If he could do it all over again, he wouldn't let her be unhappy for a day. He wouldn't let her shed a single tear, and he wouldn't let her feel the slightest bit wronged. But, could he still do it now? He didn't know. Just as he was feeling a little confused, a woman's cry came from downstairs. The voice was very familiar. Zhou Chongguang could tell that it was the landlord's woman crying. He looked up at the time. It was already 11 o'clock at night. At this time, there were usually two situations when a woman cried. One was really crying, and the other was crying because a man had sex with her. Zhou Chongguang felt that it was the latter, so he smiled and prepared to lie down. But later, not only did the woman cry, but she also cursed. "Damn it, I knew that you had an affair with that shameless woman. You've been caught this time." The woman cried hard, but her words were sharp. Zhou Chongguang had seen it before, so he understood immediately that the matter between the man and the beauty had been exposed. This kind of thing was common, and it wasn't rare. He lay down and listened to the man's intermittent explanation. His voice was also very low. After all, it was a shameful thing. He didn't care about himself, but he also had to care about his lover. The woman's man was very jealous. If he heard this from a foreign place, he would probably come back and make a scene. The man said in a low voice, "Lower your voice, it's not good if someone hears it. You did such a shameful thing, and you're afraid of others hearing it." The woman cried again, "Is it because her figure is better than mine, and she looks better than me, so you're willing to sleep with her every day?" Zhou Chongguang put his hands behind his head and thought to himself, what a lot of information. How can she have the energy to do rough work every day? Either the man was excited, or the woman was a monster who specialized in sucking men's blood. He was a little sleepy and vaguely heard the man and woman arguing for a long time. The whole building shook, but because it was a private matter between husband and wife, no one tried to stop them. In the end, he only heard the woman cry and say, "I might as well die, so that your heart won't be with that shameless little bitch." When a couple quarreled, especially over this matter, their lines were more or less the same. Zhou Chongguang didn't mind. Early in the morning, a deep and painful cry marked the beginning of the morning. The woman was dead. She was hung by a rope in the dilapidated corridor, wearing her favorite cheongsam. There was a cloth bag hanging on her body. The bag contained the money she had saved over the years. There were a few million in it, enough to buy a good house in the suburbs of B City. The reason why she didn't move before was that the business here was good, and she couldn't bear to leave. But as time went on, her husband fell in love with someone else, and she lost her life. Originally, this matter would have passed after a while, but the woman said that she didn't want to live, and the man didn't take it seriously. When the woman's body was taken down from above, the man burst into tears. Chapter 27:15. How could you just leave like that? Don't you care about our child? You keep the money for me. What's the use of the money for me? The man said from the bottom of his heart. His voice was so hoarse that it could not be heard. I just have a little relationship with that woman. Don't you know who I am in my heart? The man really loved his wife, but he couldn't resist the temptation. He had never thought of leaving this home. He said it passionately, as if he was going to leave. In the distance, Shi, who was in the grocery store, looked at all this with a pale face. Her face was full of disbelief. If the man loved his wife, then what about her? What was she? The eyes around her were full of disdain. They pointed at her and said, "Look, it's this shameless woman who forced the landlord to hang himself. What a poor woman. She's busy all day. She's not even as good as a cheap woman who wears makeup outside. That's right, she looks like a peach blossom and is specialized in seducing men. I heard that she doesn't only have one man, she has many men. She is a peach blossom spirit that sucks men's blood. In order to maintain her youth, she has to constantly sleep with men. An old granny looked at the grocery beauty and said viciously. She sure's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at the man, hoping that he would look at her. She was finished now. She had no way out. She longed for a man to protect her. Otherwise, her man would beat her to death when he found out. She was trembling all over, but the man didn't even look at her. Just as he said, the one he loved was always his wife. Hua, wait for me. The man's voice was hoarse. He tidied up the woman and then carried her stiff body back to the house. No one knew what he was doing. The crowd didn't disperse for a long time. They kept talking about this terrible thing. The sun slowly became hot. When the people around were about to disperse, something suddenly fell from the top floor. After a violent sound, the man's body lay on the ground. Blood came out of the back of his head and the corner of his mouth. The blood was bright red. It dyed the ground red. The crowd screamed. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. Without thinking, he dialed 120 and Qin Chen's number. Qin Chen was the only one who could save this man. After hanging up the phone, he ran forward, pushed aside the people around him, and squatted beside the man. He didn't dare to touch the countryman, so he said in a low voice, "The ambulance will be here soon." Hold on. The man's gaze was slanted, and blood was still flowing from the corner of his mouth. He shook his head with difficulty, and his voice was so weak that it was almost inaudible. However, Zhou Chongguang heard it. He said that he didn't have the face to live anymore. He couldn't explain it to the child. Also, he couldn't bear to leave the woman alone there. It was too cold there, and she could easily offend people. He was afraid that if she went there, no one would take care of her and she would be bullied. Flower. That was the last word the man uttered before he died. He betrayed a woman, with his life to pay. His pupils slowly dilated. In the end, there was nothing he could do to change the situation. Zhou Chongguang knelt, looked at the man, and murmured, "What's the use of giving her your life? She doesn't want your life. It's your care. It's your redemption." Chapter 27:16. You will be happy in the future. He took out the phone from the man's pocket. The phone was not broken. He saw the last message that the man had sent. It was to tell the child to be a good person and take care of himself. The ambulance came, but they were still taken to the place where they should be taken. Not long after, they would turn into dust. Zhou Chongguang straightened his body. Under the hot sun, his head was a little dizzy. He thought of himself and Qin Mu. Didn't they look like this man and woman? What's the use of giving her my life? Zhou Chongguang murmured and then smiled. His smile was very, very shallow. He felt that he suddenly understood. What did it matter if she was dead or alive? As long as he was alive, he should love her. As long as he was alive, he should love her for 2 days and treat her well for 2 days. If he left, his Mu would not take things too hard. If he hid, she would feel guilty and take things too hard. Zhou Chongguang raised his head and closed his eyes slightly. Now he was going to look for her, right now, right away. He walked very quickly and quickly crossed the road on the opposite side. Because it was a high-end residential area, it was completely different from the place where he lived. The trees blocked the sun, so it was not so hot. And he saw Qin Mu putting up advertisements not far away. He smiled faintly and walked towards her. He picked up an advertisement on the way. When he saw it, his face turned dark and green. She was not looking for a person, but a dog. It was a photo of him, Zhou Chongguang, but it was written that he was looking for a dog. This little bastard. Zhou Chongguang smiled softly and then called out to Qin Mu about 10 meters behind her. She was wearing a loose floral dress and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. When she heard his voice, all the things in her hands fell to the ground. She slowly turned around and looked at him. Her lips moved slightly, and after a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, "Zhou Chongguang. Isn't it a dog?" He said loudly. Qin Mu's eyes were glistening with tears, and she also said loudly, "It's a dog named Zhou Chongguang. Now I've found it." He smiled and walked forward slowly. He came back by himself, Qin Mu. From now on, she was his master. Qin Mu pursed her lips with tears in her eyes. She was waiting for him proudly. She looked into his eyes and smiled in a way he hadn't seen her smile in a long time. Slowly, he finally walked closer. When he was only 5 meters away from her, his expression changed. A coach car was charging towards them, heading straight in Qin Mu's direction. The driver should be a newbie, and there was a girl screaming in the car. Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang heard his own voice, and then his body was sent flying. He seemed to hear the sound of bones breaking. Was it his bones? Is his body still there? Where were his hands? Was he still hugging Qin Mu? When Zhou Chongguang fell, he looked at Qin Mu, who was still standing there with a pale face. He closed his eyes slightly, and there was a metallic taste in his throat. However, he still supported himself and said softly, "Don't be afraid, it's okay." 2 seconds later, Qin Mu finally came back to her senses. She ran over and squatted in front of him. "Zhou Chongguang. How are you?" He looked at her, and his vision was a little blurry. It was all the color of blood. He whispered, "Dizzy, Mu Mu. I'll call an ambulance." "Zhou Chongguang, hold on." She hugged him with one hand and dialed Qin Chen's number with trembling fingers. Chapter 27:17. Qin Mu was hugging Zhou Chongguang. As he lay in her arms, he struggled to open his eyes. Through the blood, he saw that she was crying. "Mu Mu, don't cry." His voice was hoarse. "Don't cry." Qin Mu shook her head desperately. "I won't cry, I won't cry." She reached out and wiped away the blood from his eyes, but the more she wiped, the more she was afraid. She was afraid that his blood would run dry. "Zhou Chongguang, didn't you say that you've let me down? If you feel that you've let me down, you're not allowed to die." She said in a sobbing voice, "If you die, who am I going to settle the score with?" "Zhou Chongguang, do you hear me?" He looked at her in a daze. Slowly, he couldn't see or hear, but he knew that the woman crying in front of him was the love of his life. His fingers, gently moved, slowly moved, and finally, held her hand. He could no longer see, but he still held her hand tightly. Just before he fainted, he managed to utter a few words in broken articulation. If he used his life to pay for his mistakes, would it still be useful? Qin Mu hugged him and pressed her face against his bloody face. "Zhou Chongguang, you're not allowed to die. If you die, I really dare to abort the child and find the ugliest man to marry. I won't have a good life for the rest of my life. Do you hear me?" He didn't answer her and just lay there quietly. Blood slowly flowed down from his forehead. Qin Mu hugged him and kept wiping away the blood for him. At the side, the person in the coach car got out of the car and stood there in a daze. Qin Chen came in person and arrived very quickly. The ambulance arrived at the same time. Qin Chen squatted down and checked his breathing. He looked at Qin Mu, who was crying as if a man had died. "He's not dead yet." He asked the nurses to carefully carry him to the ambulance. Because he knew Zhou Chongguang's blood type, he directly gave him a blood test. Qin Chen then put on gloves and checked Zhou Chongguang's wound. "Qin Chen?" Qin Mu asked nervously. Qin Chen looked at Zhou Chongguang attentively and then narrowed his eyes. He might go blind. He was still in the mood to joke around. "Qin Mu, do you mind?" Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. A blood clot is pressing on the nerves, which may cause temporary blindness. Qin Chen's voice was solemn. The most important thing now is whether his broken body can withstand it. After all, Zhou Chongguang was someone who needed a liver transplant. Qin Mu bit her lip and didn't say anything. She remembered what Zhou Chongguang had said: if he used his life to pay for his mistakes, what was the use? She pursed her lips and whispered, he won't. He won't die. Qin Chen smiled. It's good that you have confidence. The ambulance drove into Xingyuan Hospital and the patient was pushed into the operating theater. Qin Chen went to change into his surgical gown. Qin Mu ignored her stomach and chased after the cart. She held Zhou Chongguang's hand. His fingers were slightly cold, not as warm as before. And he had also lost a lot of weight. The moment he was pushed into the operating theater, Qin Mu said in a low voice, Zhou Chongguang, you have to come back alive. No matter what happened in the past, I can forgive you. He lay quietly and didn't respond. Only his fingers moved slightly. Zhou Chongguang, you heard it, didn't you? You felt it, didn't you? Qin Mu suddenly burst into tears. Chapter 27:18. I will. Qin Mu nodded. She stepped back and sat on the bench. Her face was pale, but she called Zhao Zi and her parents. She needed them by her side now, and Chongguang needed Zhao Zi. Only now did she know how lonely he was. She had so many people by her side, and Chongguang only had Zhao Zi. Everyone was waiting at the door, even Zhou Chongguang's secretary was there. Qin Mu called Lin Shui, and Lin Shui came without hesitation. Chongguang, look, I'm relieved. I've called everyone in your life, and they all want you to live well. Chongguang, you don't just have me, you have the whole world. You have a lot more. It's not what you think. Chongguang, I hope you get better. Please. The surgery took a long time. It was a full 10 hours, and they waited from dawn to dusk. Qin Mu was anxious and afraid, but she still ate something. At 10 o'clock at night, Qin Chen walked out of the surgery room. He took off his mask and said calmly, he survived, but his liver can't wait any longer. Also, whether his body can survive the surgery is also a problem. He looked at Qin Mu. And he's temporarily blind. Qin Mu, you have to be prepared. Everything is in the worst direction. At such a time, he didn't want to lie to Qin Mu. He knew that Qin Mu could survive. She would be with Zhou Chongguang no matter what happened. That was enough. Qin Mu pursed her lips and nodded. I know. Can I see him now? He'll be in the ICU ward. It's best if it's as soon as possible. He can't be infected with any bacteria now. If his condition is good, he'll be moved to the general ward tomorrow afternoon. Qin Chen looked tired, but he didn't rest. He personally moved Zhou Chongguang over. Qin Mu changed into the protective suit and went in slowly. He lay still, his head wrapped in gauze. In addition to the head injury, 2 of his ribs are broken, so he may not be able to move for a long time. Qin Chen said lightly, Mumu, don't cry. He can feel it if you cry. If your heart hurts, it will be even more painful. Qin Mu nodded and tried hard to hold back her tears. I won't cry. I just want to be with him for a while. Qin Chen gestured for the nurse to leave while he guarded the door, pretending not to hear his sister's embarrassing words. Alas, love is really a dangerous thing. If Mumu hadn't been so obsessed with me at that time, it wouldn't be like this today. Qin Mu knelt down in front of Zhou Chongguang. Her fingers trembled as she caressed his handsome face. His face was pale, without any color of blood. She looked at him eagerly, as if she wanted to carve him into her mind. Chongguang, are you in pain? She whispered, I'm in pain too. Chongguang, why are you so stupid? You love me so much. Why didn't you tell me everything? Why did you leave by yourself? Did you give up on me or yourself? You don't even dare to love me anymore. She had said that she wouldn't cry, but she couldn't help crying. She tried her best to hold back her tears. She murmured, "I'd rather you be the same as before. You're hateful, but you're high-spirited, not like this. You make my heart ache and make me feel guilty. Really, Chongguang, I'll feel guilty when you're not well." Chapter 27:19. Qin Mu bent down slowly and pulled his palm over, letting his palm gently touch her abdomen. She whispered softly, "Chongguang, do you feel it? This is our child, Shuemu's brother or sister. Don't you miss Shuemu? He already knows how to call me mummy, not me. Don't you want him to call you daddy?" She pressed her face against his body, not daring to hurt him. Even though he was under anesthesia, she was afraid that he would get hurt, afraid that he would feel even the slightest bit of pain. It was only now that she realized that while he was hurting her, she was hurting him as well. "Chongguang, if I don't love you so much, can we be like other couples? I turn a blind eye, and you, when you're tired of playing outside, when you're tired, when you can't play anymore, you'll come back on your own, thinking that you're still my wife?" She laughed softly, tears welling up in her eyes. "If that's the case, how great would it be? But you're definitely not willing. You'll say that you're willing to exchange everything for such a relationship. Yes, we've come this far. Now, Chongguang, you're lying here. Nothing else matters. I just want you to be alive. It doesn't matter if you can't see or move, I'll be your eyes. I can push the wheelchair, and when Shuemu grows up, he can help me push it too. At the very least, we still have a child, and I won't be tired. Chongguang, can you live well? We still have many years, and we still have many tomorrows waiting for you. Haven't you always wanted my forgiveness?" Qin Mu's eyes were filled with tears as she took out a diamond ring from her pocket. I found it in the bedside cabinet. You lied to me. You said that you took it away, but you've always kept it on my photo." She cried and smiled at the same time, slowly putting the diamond ring on her ring finger. "Qin Mu is willing to marry Zhou Chongguang, and will never divorce again," she said softly. At this time, Qin Chen came over at the right time and took out a ring from his pocket. He found it on Zhou Chongguang. He silently gave it to Qin Mu. In his heart, he thought, "You've already become like this, but you're still bullying single dogs. Is it humane?" Qin Mu smiled and put the ring on his finger bit by bit. He had lost a lot of weight and was a little big. She plucked a long strand of hair from her head and carefully tied it up. After putting it on, it was just right. "Okay, from now on, we are husband and wife again." Qin Mu's eyes were filled with tears as she leaned forward. Qin Chen stopped her. "Hey, my good sister, do you really think this is a wedding? Are you going to kiss the groom now? The process wasn't like this. Also, be careful not to infect him. He can't withstand your passion." Qin Mu was confused. "I just wanted to see if he wanted to drink water." Qin Chen waved his hand. "I was thinking too much." Qin Mu turned her head. "Qin Chen, thank you." Although they were family, she still had to thank him. Because Qin Chen had done his best for her, Zhou Chongguang, and Shuemu. Qin Chen smiled lazily. "You're too polite." Then, he couldn't help but say, "I'll thank you when he survives." Qin Mu was speechless. Then, she was asked to leave. For the next 12 hours, Qin Chen didn't leave her side at all. He didn't even close his eyes. Chapter 27:20. It turned out that Qin Anlin didn't have a good impression of Zhou Chongguang. This time, he was really touched. This kid was sincere to Qin Mu, but he had a wrong start. Their love came a little too late. Probably because his desire to live was too strong, Zhou Chongguang's condition was much better the next day. He also woke up for a short while. He was still conscious, but he was extremely weak. Qin Chen moved him to the VIP ward. 8 nurses took care of him in 4 shifts. Qin Mu was also brought back to the apartment by him. He looked at Qin Mu. Sleep for at least 10 hours. After 10 hours, you can go wherever you want. I don't care. Qin Mu bit her lip, but she still listened to Qin Chen. She didn't care about herself, but she couldn't ignore the child. Zhou Chongguang won't die. As the saying goes, a scourge lives for 1,000 years. Qin Chen was wearing a bathrobe, leaning against the door of the master bedroom and chuckling. Now the master bedroom was completely given to Qin Mu. In fact, they could also sleep together, but he was used to being a man. He always felt that it was a little strange to sleep with Qin Mu now. And Qin Mu probably thought so too, so she never invited him. Qin Chen was also tired. He hadn't slept for nearly 36 hours, and he had performed surgery for such a long time. He was not made of iron, but he also needed at least 10 hours. According to science, people who always lacked sleep would die early, and he didn't want to die yet. However, he wasn't as lucky as Qin Mu. He only slept for 5 hours before he was urged to wake up by a call from the hospital. Qin Chen scolded the director while putting on his bathrobe. I'm not a doctor at Xingyuan Hospital now. The director almost cried. Dr. Qin, I beg you. This time, it's a big shot. The higher-ups appointed you. Then I appoint you. Qin Chen's tone was not very good. At this time, anyone would lose their temper. The dean said a lot of begging words. Qin Chen was actually just saying it. For this reason, he would still go. When they arrived at the hospital, the surgery took 7 or 8 hours. After it was over, the patient was pushed to the VIP ward. The patient's secretary came forward and handed over a business card. She said with a smile, if Dr. Qin has any trouble in the future, you can look for us, directly. Qin Chen took it, glanced at it, and smiled. Thank you, your leader. You're welcome. The secretary was very polite. Our madam said that she would invite Dr. Qin to dinner in a few days. She thinks that Dr. Qin is talented and good-looking. He lowered his voice, our leader has a daughter with high standards. Dr. Qin must have caught her eye. Qin Chen cursed in his heart. Just as he was about to refuse, a chuckle came from the side. Your luck with women is not bad. Congratulations. Qin Chen turned his head and saw Lan Yu. He rolled his eyes. He really didn't know where the stylish artist Lan Yu had gone. After being a vegetable for a while, it seemed that his integrity had disappeared. Then, he smiled. This Mr. Lan beside me is also quite good. The secretary looked at Lan Yu and smiled meaningfully. Mr. Lan seems to have a history of marriage. Qin Chen looked at the secretary, lit a cigarette, took a puff, and then put his hand on Lan Yu's shoulder. We. You know, we. The secretary looked at this and looked at that. After a minute, she finally understood. Chapter 27-21. Everyone in the hospital knows about it. Qin Chen smiled and took out a photo. Look at this. He didn't expect that the photo that was circulated last time would be useful. Qin Chen wasn't an arrogant person. He understood that although the Qin family was a celebrity, the person under his scalpel was the real deal. If he didn't find a reason, the family wouldn't let him go. The secretary looked at the photo and confirmed that it was a real kiss. He also believed it and sighed. I can only say that I'm not fated with Dr. Qin. But Madam will respect Dr. Qin's sexual orientation. Qin Chen smiled. Thank you for understanding. Then, he hugged Lan Yu and said gently, didn't you say that you ordered takeout for me? Let's eat in my office. Lan Yu looked at the beautiful face in front of him and laughed in his heart. He didn't order takeout. Qin Chen was really good at deceiving people. But of course, he wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. So, he smiled and left with Qin Chen hugging each other. The secretary looked at their backs and sighed. Dr. Qin grew up well and had a good family background. He was good in all kinds of ways, but his sexual orientation wasn't good. At this time, a well-maintained middle-aged woman came over. The secretary went over and whispered a few words to her. The woman was a little surprised and then a look of pity appeared on her face. After a while, she had to comfort her baby daughter. Her daughter was so old, but she had never been interested in men. Now that she finally liked one, her sexual orientation was wrong. However, as a mother, she always didn't want her daughter to be with a man. That would be too unfair and she wouldn't be happy for the rest of her life. The woman looked at him and then lowered her head. She wrote a check and said in a low voice, "Although the Qin family doesn't lack money, this is also a token of my sincerity. Go and take it to Dr. Qin." After saying that, the woman sighed and left. She also liked Dr. Qin's appearance. He was really good and had a good career. He wasn't like the men in the officialdom or the business world who were full of evil tricks. Looking at Dr. Qin's temperament, he was really a second-generation rich man. What a pity, what a pity. The woman left, and the secretary went over with the check. Qin Chen and Lan Yu entered the office. Qin Chen was about to send Lan Yu away, but the secretary followed him. He endured it and decided to let Lan Yu stay. The secretary presented the check politely and respectfully. And Qin Chen did not refuse. He was born in the Qin family. Although he didn't mix around in the business world, there were some things that he understood. This check was a kind gesture. If he rejected it, he wouldn't be giving them face. Thus, he accepted it and warmly spoke a few more words about that person's situation, reassuring his wife and so on. The secretary was very satisfied. When she went back, she didn't say less good things about Qin Chen in front of her master. However, the more she praised him, the more melancholy Madame felt. Then, a certain high-ranking Madame also became a little gossipy. She coughed lightly and said, "Say, between Dr. Qin and that man, which one is the aggressor and which one is the aggressor?" The secretary was in a difficult position. "I didn't ask." Madame smiled and did not ask any more questions. In Qin Chen's office. Qin Chen leaned against the office table and sipped the coffee in his cup. He looked up and glanced at Lan Yu. "Why are you still here?" Lan Yu went forward and stood in front of him. He was much taller than Qin Chen, so he felt a sense of superiority. Chapter 27-22. However, Qin Chen didn't do anything because of this. He looked at Lan Yu lazily. There was a small provocation. "Throw it away after using it, huh?" Lan Yu took another step forward and trapped Qin Chen between himself and the desk. One of his long legs was even stuck between Qin Chen's body. Qin Chen was indifferent and didn't care. He looked at Lan Yu. "Do you want another kiss?" "What if I do?" Lan Yu's fingers gently touched his lips. There was a light coffee stain on it. Then, he put it in his mouth and sucked it off. Lan Yu's action was very seductive. Qin Chen looked at him and felt that he was becoming more and more like Zhou Chengguang. He didn't have any artistic aura like before, so he sneered. "If you have the time, why don't you find a second wife? Look at how others dislike you because of your marriage history. If you don't work hard, you will probably be a bachelor for the rest of your life." Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and was about to say something when a timid voice sounded at the door. "Is it Dr. Qin? The takeout is here." Qin Chen looked at Lan Yu. Lan Yu didn't move. Qin Chen stretched out his leg and kicked him. He didn't hold back and directly kicked his important part. Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. "How can you feel comfortable if I break it?" He was just bickering with him, but obviously, Dr. Qin had a higher status. As he pushed him away, he said indifferently, "Then you'll be below and I'll be above." He walked to the door. The face of the delivery boy was already red. He actually saw such a scene while delivering takeout. The young boy was shocked and speechless. He just held up the takeout and said, "It's the takeout you ordered." Qin Chen took it casually. His slender and beautiful fingers seemed to carelessly brush against the boy's fingers, making him feel seductive. The boy's face was red and he swallowed hard. "Have a good meal." Then, he fled. If he didn't leave now, he would become crooked. The doctor just now was really good-looking. He was so good-looking that he looked like a character from the anime. Why did he order fried chicken rice when he was clearly someone who didn't eat the food of the world? Qin Chen chuckled as he watched his lackey flee. He slowly walked back and placed the takeout on the table. He walked to the bathroom and said, "I want to take a shower first. Mr. Lan, please help yourself. I hope I don't see you again when I come out." Lan Yu looked at the fried chicken rice. He didn't think that Qin Chen, who was so picky, would be willing to eat this. Didn't he eat delicacies every time? A cup of coffee cost thousands of yuan. As long as he was alive, he would feel that every breath he took was more expensive than others. Qin Chen took off his coat and looked at Lan Yu. He smiled and said, "Don't doubt me. I'm very hungry. This restaurant delivers food the fastest." His highest record was not eating for 24 hours, and he was on the operating table the whole time. After he came out, he ate 3 servings of fried chicken rice. When Lan Yu heard his words, he suddenly felt a sense of discomfort in his heart. Qin Chen was a doctor. No matter how precious he was usually, he was a doctor in the operating theater. He was more responsible and serious than any other doctor. He was even strict with himself. Qin Chen went to take a shower. Lan Yu went over and closed the office door. Then, he walked to the sofa and opened the takeout. There was a small medicine bag between his fingers. Chapter 27-23. Lan Yu hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he made up his mind and put it into the rice. It was colorless and tasteless. Eating it would make people need to have sex. Without it, they would feel terrible. He believed that a person like Qin Chen, who hadn't had sex for a long time, wouldn't be able to endure it. He just needed to wait quietly. In order to lower Qin Chen's vigilance, he even ate a few pieces of fried chicken. Qin Chen wiped his wet hair and saw that Lan Yu hadn't left yet. He frowned and stood at the door in only a bathrobe. "Why haven't you left yet?" "I'm hungry, so I also ordered a fried chicken rice. I'll eat here before I leave." Lan Yu crossed his hands in front of him. "It tastes good." "You're crazy." Qin Chen smiled, walked over slowly, sat down, and ate his fast food. He ate very quickly. Perhaps, as he said, he was really hungry. Lan Yu saw him eat the medicine together with the rice, and his Adam's apple couldn't help moving because of the desire. He looked at the bathrobe on Qin Chen and laughed dryly. "Don't tell me you're not wearing anything underneath." Qin Chen looked up and stared at him. He said slowly, "Do you want to take it off and see?" "A little." Lan Yu's eyes were fixed on him. "What about you? Do you want to? The medicine should be working, right?" Qin Chen glared at him again. "You're crazy." He continued to eat with his head lowered, and Lan Yu looked at him from the side. Slowly, he saw that there was fine sweat on Qin Chen's forehead, and he coughed lightly. "Aren't you hot? We're both men. Take off your bathrobe. It's cooler." Qin Chen looked at him and said very slowly, "Have you been thinking about this for a long time?" As he said that, he put down the fast food in his hand and slowly swept all the food into the cylinder. His movements were very elegant and beautiful. Lan Yu's heart skipped a beat as he watched. Shouldn't ordinary people immediately pounce on him when they're in heat? Qin Chen had clearly moved his eyes. Why did he have such a reaction? He was a little uncertain, but he didn't dare to act rashly, so he just stared blankly. Qin Chen tidied up the place, then walked to the door and locked it from the inside. He leaned against the door and asked indifferently, "Here, or in my lounge?" Lan Yu's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" Qin Chen looked at him coldly. "Did you drug my food? Don't remember? Or did he become a vegetable again?" Before Lan Yu could speak, Qin Chen looked at him quietly. "Are you going to do it yourself, or should I call Niuilang now?" Lan Yu's brain was too muddled, he did not notice that he was talking about Niuilang and not a woman. He only thought that Qin Chen liked the same sex as him now. He didn't expect to have such good luck. He immediately said, "Let's go to the lounge." Lan Yu chuckled, and there was a hint of mockery in his laughter. However, Lan Yu couldn't care less. He was finally going to get what he wanted for a long time. Although this guy was still a bit poisonous, he would definitely kill him later. He would let him know how powerful he was. Although Lan Yu didn't know what to do with him and Qin Chen, two men. He had no experience, however, he was excited and eager to try. Qin Chen was much more proactive than he thought. As soon as he entered the lounge, he hugged a very hot body. Chapter 27-24. He was hugging a very hot body. It was softer and more slender than he had imagined. It was almost like a woman's. Lan Yu was ecstatic. He had never been so excited in so many years. In the midst of the chaos, he kissed Qin Chen's collarbone and asked confusedly, later, "Who will take the lead?" He actually just wanted to get it. He didn't care too much about who it was. In fact, he was even looking forward to how Qin Chen would treat him. Just thinking about it, Lan Yu felt that he was indeed a pervert. But this perverted idea was about to be realized. His body was trembling with excitement. Qin Chen unexpectedly took the initiative. He took the initiative to kiss Lan Yu and bit his earlobe. "You do it, Lan Yu was a little disappointed, but his blood was still hot. He was about to take care of this quack. In the midst of the chaos, the bathrobe finally fell to the ground, then, Lan Yu was petrified. Lan Yu was stunned. Lan Yu was dumbfounded. Lan Yu was at a loss. All the blood in Lan Yu's body cooled down. How could this be? How could this be? He struggled to think. How could Qin Chen be a woman? Indistinctly, Lan Yu heard himself scream in shock. He was ashamed of himself, like a woman. Qin Chen's whole body was bathed in the enchanting light. Her whole body was mesmerizing. Her body was not like a man's at all. At least in Lan Yu's eyes, she was simply a goddess. Although it was an airport runway, the lines of her body were too beautiful. He was a painter, so he knew how beautiful that kind of strength and beauty was. It was simply a work of art. His Adam's apple moved uncontrollably. He reached out, not daring to touch her. "Lan Yu, what's wrong?" She buried her face in the pillow. Her red lips moved slightly, and it was very sexy. Lan Yu shook his head. He still couldn't believe it. He was supposed to do it with a man, but now it was a woman. Was there something wrong with him? If it was a man, he would have dared to do it. Now that it was a woman, Yu Wang was even more ferocious, but he didn't dare to do it. She was timid. Because of her perfection. Qin Chen chuckled softly. Although it was faint, there was a kind of temptation in it. "Lan Yu, weren't you the one who drugged me? I can't take it anymore. Then call and find me a man. I can't take it anymore." Although her voice was calm, she really couldn't take it anymore. The veins on Lan Yu's forehead bulged, and his voice was low and hoarse. "I don't need another man." He looked at her, looked into her eyes, reached for her chin, and kissed her. He trembled as he worshipped her. What he didn't expect was that it was Qin Chen's first time. When he took her, she still had tears in her eyes. She reached out and hit his shoulder. "Lan Yu, I hate you so much." Then his shoulder was bitten, and the bite was beyond recognition. Only then did he know how fierce Qin Chen was when she was unreasonable. Moreover, her body was very attractive. The more she acted like this, the more he couldn't let go. He couldn't let go. He hadn't had a woman for a long time. Even though he knew that it was her first time, and he should control himself, he still couldn't control himself. He gave it to her again and again, and took it again and again. From the afternoon until night fell, he dominated her for a whole 6 hours. Outside, there were several groups of people looking for Qin Chen. Although the door was closed, it was too noisy. Chapter 27-25. After a moment of passion. Qin Chen lay between the pillows, panting softly. There was a layer of blush on her face, which was indescribably beautiful. Lan Yu felt that he was blind in the past. How could Qin Chen be a man? Now, even the words, "live a beautiful life, live a fragrant life," were not enough to describe her beauty. His fingers unconsciously fell on her shoulder, and his voice was a little tense. "Does it hurt badly? What do you think?" Qin Chen rolled her eyes at him, then turned over and let out a long breath. "Lan Yu, how long has it been since you had a woman?" She looked at him, and there was a breathtaking brilliance in her narrow eyes. Lan Yu said very honestly, 2 or 3 years. Qin Chen glanced at him, then lay flat and said faintly, "Go to the pharmacy and get some medicine for me." Now, she couldn't move at all. Lan Yu's voice was a little chaotic. "Let me check." Qin Chen's answer was to kick him. Her legs were very long, and she almost kicked Lan Yu's shoulder. Lan Yu raised his eyes and looked at her faintly. Then, he stuck close to her body. Qin Chen's face changed. Although she was very tired, she still propped herself up and looked at him. "Lan Yu, if it's not enough, go find a woman to deal with the shameful Yuang for you." He deliberately rubbed against her body. "But I only want you." Qin Chen stared at him angrily. "Go buy medicine." But he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he whispered in her ear, "Qin Chen, you obviously know karate, but you still let me kiss you so many times. In fact, you also like me, don't you?" Qin Chen's face was very dark, and she gritted her teeth. "Lan Yu, I said go buy medicine. It hurts so much." Her face, however, was a little red in the midst of the darkness. "Are you shy?" Lan Yu was in a particularly good mood. He reached out and touched her little face. He got out of bed and put on his clothes. He didn't wear a full set of clothes either. He just casually put on a shirt and trousers. He didn't button the top 2 buttons of his shirt, deliberately revealing the kiss mark on his neck. Qin Chen, who had taken the medicine, was naturally also crazy. There were many marks on her body, and Lan Yu was not much better. Qin Chen couldn't do anything to him, and she was really tired. Her delicate face was buried in the pillow, and her voice was soft. "Go quickly. Also, I'm a little hungry. Bring some food over." She had been operating for such a long time, and her physical strength had long been overdrawn. Moreover, she had been suppressed by this inhumane fellow for 6 consecutive hours. She felt that it was a miracle that she did not die. Moreover, it was her first time. Qin Chen was so tired that he fell asleep. Lan Yu had walked to the door, but he suddenly turned back. He covered her with the blanket and kissed her. His voice was a little hoarse. "Qin Chen, I'm very happy." She reached out and patted his handsome face. "I'm not happy." He smiled. His smile was full of tenderness. He had a lot of things to say to her, but he wanted to wait until she had rested. He had liked Cher before, but it was not as real as this moment. Possession. So, it was such a wonderful thing. Moreover, it was the possession of Qin Chen, who was like a god. Up until now, his body was still trembling, and he couldn't describe the feeling. When Lan Yu walked out, there were a few nurses on duty at the door. They all looked at Lan Yu and gulped. Chapter 27-26. Oh my God, 2 men. Who was the aggressor and who was the aggressor? Their minds were filled with thoughts. The female doctors and nurses in the hospital were heartbroken. So many people liked Dr. Chin, but Dr. Chin had never taken the initiative to anyone. It turned out that he liked men. And this man was Lan Yu. They remembered that Dr. Chin was quite mean to Lan Yu in the past. How did they end up together? Lan Yu glanced at them and didn't explain much. If they misunderstood, then so be it. Anyway, the one who slept with Qin Chen was him, not someone else. Soon, the news that he had slept with Qin Chen spread throughout Xingyuan, including the madam and the young lady. Lan Yu didn't care. He leisurely went to buy a tube of medicine. The pharmacy lady even specially explained how to use it. In the end, she coughed lightly and asked in a very gossipy manner, "Mr. Lan, is this medicine for Dr. Chin or you?" Lan Yu glanced at her and chuckled. Of course, it's for Dr. Chin. The pharmacy lady instantly imagined a scene. Dr. Chin's, something was blooming, it was very, very tragic. She looked at Lan Yu and smiled. Her voice was also gentle. Mr. Lan, you have to be gentle to our Dr. Chin. Dr. Chin's body is weak, especially between men. You have to be more careful. Otherwise, it'll be very easy for you to go to the colorectal department. Lan Yu smiled. I will be gentle. He winked at the pharmacy lady, a little ambiguous. Then, the news spread again, Dr. Chin was the one at the bottom. Lan Yu personally went outside to bring 2 sets of dinner. Thinking that it was her first time, he asked someone to make warm and nourishing food. He personally saw it cooked and brought it to her office. As soon as he opened the door, the decadent smell inside made his face a little red and his heart beat faster. He naturally knew how impulsive he was today, a man's limit, or his own limit, he naturally understood it today. When he walked in, Qin Chen was still asleep. Her face was turned to the side, and her sleeping face looked much softer, like a child. Lan Yu's heart was also soft. He sat on the side of the bed and touched her short hair. He was hesitant whether to let her continue sleeping or wake her up to eat something. Later, looking at her legs, he decided to help her apply medicine first. When Qin Chen woke up, he felt that something was wrong with his body. He looked up and saw his black head. It was also cold to the touch. Thinking about it, he knew what he was doing. This beast. How was he applying ointment? He was clearly taking advantage of her. Qin Chen endured it and finally kicked him away. What are you doing? His voice was cold. Lan Yu fell to the side and didn't seem to mind. He smiled and said, I was helping you apply the medicine. It's fine now. How long did you put it on? Qin Chen sneered. Lan Yu was quite honest. About half an hour. Did you find anything? She sat up and casually put on a bathrobe. Then, she got off the bed and walked to the bathroom. Her movements were still neat, just like before, without the gentleness of a woman. However, Lan Yu was extremely mesmerized. Do you want to shower together? He shamelessly hugged her from behind and smelled her scent. He couldn't bear to let go. Qin Chen's body froze for a moment and she turned her head. We'll talk after I shower. Chapter 27-27. He felt that he was a man. Since he had taken her, he had to treat her well. No matter how hairy Qin Chen was, she was still a woman. In bed, she was even more of a woman. Moreover, she was very much like a soul. His heart skipped a beat. Then, he helped her make the bed. He didn't know why, but he just did it. Qin Chen was an extremely self-disciplined and independent person. But now, he was willing to dote on her like a child. Lan Yu tidied up the office and lounged inside and out. The only thing missing was a bouquet of flowers. Looking at it, he was extremely satisfied. She would definitely praise him for being capable later. However, he was also quite capable just now. She should be satisfied with 6 hours. Just thinking about it made Lan Yu excited again. He couldn't think about it. If he were to look at her again, she would definitely be angry. He had to appear more profound and gentlemanly in front of her. He didn't want to be a man who was always full of ideas. Even though he was. When Qin Chen came out, she was slightly stunned. Then, she wiped her hair and asked Lan Yu, "Has the cleaner been here?" Lan Yu's face was extremely gloomy. However, he still nodded. "Yes. It's quite clean. My office never needs cleaning." Qin Chen glanced at him and threw down the towel. She walked outside and sat on the sofa. After drinking a mouthful of soup, she said, "Are you sure you want to keep lying to me?" Lan Yu was actually speechless. He looked at Qin Chen calmly drinking the soup and couldn't help but say in a hoarse voice, "Aren't you afraid that I'll plot against you again?" "It doesn't matter. If you can't fuck me to death, then I'll fuck you to death when I wake up." Qin Chen wiped her lips and began to eat. She really had a big appetite. In less than 10 minutes, she had finished her share. After eating, she looked at Lan Yu. Lan Yu felt that he was being left out, and his tone wasn't very good. "You eat." Qin Chen really ate it. It wasn't until she finished his portion that Lan Yu was surprised. "You can eat so much." And her stomach was flat. This was simply unbelievable. Qin Chen smiled and looked at him. "Clean up this place." Lan Yu was a little dissatisfied. She had eaten a lot, but he had been moving for 6 hours without rest. Now he was starving to death, but out of love, he still cleaned up, and finally tried to sit next to her, hoping to get a kiss. But Qin Chen refused. She stood up and walked to the window. With her back facing him, she said softly, "Lan Yu, you should go." His voice was soft and cold. Never been so cold. It wasn't the venomous tongue she had in the past, but a kind of banishment. She didn't even want to joke with him. Lan Yu sat there, a little stunned. "Qin Chen. Do you think that sleeping with me can change anything?" Qin Chen tilted her head and looked at him. "Lan Yu, do you know me?" Lan Yu's Adam's apple moved a little, and he didn't say anything. Qin Chen's voice became even softer. "Do you know my past? Do you know that I have someone I like? You despicably drugged me and took possession of my body. You even thought that I was a man." As she said, she touched her forehead. "You should go. We are not people of the same world." Chapter 27-28. It's never been good. Everything is your illusion. Qin Chen had a faint smile on his face, but it was also very piercing. "Lan Yu, do you know why I slept with you?" Lan Yu's eyes narrowed. He refused to listen in his heart, but he had to listen. Qin Chen had a stronger aura than him. In front of Qin Chen, he was simply like a servant. And he asked for this situation. Who could he blame? Qin Chen looked at him quietly. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Because I know that if I don't sleep with you, the family outside will not let me go. Only after I sleep with you, they will really give up. When a little girl is willful, it won't be much better than your behavior today." Lan Yu gritted his teeth. "So, you just used me? I'm just a tool. In your opinion, it's the same no matter who I sleep with?" "Qin Chen, you are really great. You actually sacrificed so much. Let me guess, is it for the Qin family or for the person in your heart?" "He's gone," Qin Chen said quietly, and his eyes were also calm. Lan Yu was stunned for a moment. He couldn't digest what she said. That person was gone, and he had no rival in love. But why did he feel that this was worse than having a rival in love? Because he was gone, it would grow in her heart like a thorn. From then on, he was afraid that he would never be able to pull it out. Qin Chen still smiled lightly. No matter what you think, it was you who drugged me. It's too far-fetched to say that I used you. After she finished speaking, she turned her head and no longer looked at him. Lan Yu, you should go. I went to the United States a long time ago, and the meaning was very clear. It's impossible between you and me. If there was no that person, would you, like me? Lan Yu asked almost humbly. Qin Chen didn't hesitate. No. Have you never been moved? Lan Yu narrowed his eyes, looking at her beautiful back and the rejection around her. No. She was still indifferent. To me, you're just a patient. You. Lan Yu stepped forward, turned her body around from behind, and pinched her chin. How many patients have you slept with, After asking the question, he regretted it. It was clearly her first time, and he was the only man who had taken her. Wasn't it a little too much for him to say that? Qin Chen looked at him without any hurt in his eyes. It was just like how she was normally, without any emotions, like a deity, no one able to harm her. Suddenly, Lan Yu was confused. Qin Chen said that he didn't know her past. Now, he really wanted to know. He didn't want to give up on her, so he said softly, then tell me, okay? Tell me what I don't know. That person can always be in your heart, but if you put me in your heart, even if it's a small place, I will still stay there. That was the biggest concession he could make. Qin Chen didn't care. Lan Yu, go find a woman who's suitable for you. My world is different from yours. In her world, there was only purity and innocence. There would be no men like Lan Yu and Zhou Chengguang. And she would have to return to that world. It had always been like this. She would always be in that world. She didn't want to come out. She liked to stand at a high place and look at the world. She liked to be untainted by anything, because she couldn't afford to be tainted. She didn't want to see the people or things she cared about disappear again. She didn't want to suffer that kind of pain again. Lan Yu didn't know anything. His so-called love was so shallow. What he liked was nothing more than the mysteriousness and this body of hers. She said softly, I can accompany you to bed. Until you get tired of it. Chapter 27-29. Lan Yu just stared at her, and there was a touch of hurt in his eyes. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, Qin Chen, in your heart, am I such a man? A man who is satisfied with the beast jade? It doesn't matter to me whether you are or not. Qin Chen's voice was very faint. Lan Yu, just say yes or no. Lan Yu looked at her and smiled very lightly. Qin Chen, you are still so high and mighty. Even if you schemed against me, you still do it naturally. It's just like when I woke up, you guarded me and were extremely sarcastic. He took a deep breath. In the eyes of many people, you are a godlike existence, but in my heart, you are an ordinary woman, a woman that I can take care of and love, even if you don't need it. He said it bitterly. And Qin Chen's lips were tightly pursed, and he did not speak. The way she looked at him was also calm, just like what she said, he was not important to her. Lan Yu was not a fool. If she said it was not important, then it was really not important. When did the high and mighty Qin Chen ever make a joke? But he still didn't give up. He tilted his head and smiled at Qin Chen, what should I do? I don't seem to want to give up yet. Up to you. Qin Chen still did not give him too much expression. Lan Yu stepped forward and hugged her body. Although she was like an airport, her body was very beautiful. Qin Chen's body froze, and the corner of his mouth also raised a trace of a sneer. After all, he was just a man with heavy desires. But Lan Yu picked up her bathrobe, helped her put it on, gently tied the belt, and said in a very low voice, rest early. At this moment, his voice was a little decadent, and there was not a bit of the previous high spirits. Qin Chen looked at him quietly, and suddenly felt a little sad, for Lan Yu. Her voice softened a little. Lan Yu, really, don't like me. Liking someone is harmful to your health. Her fingers gently clasped onto his shoulder, gently caressing it as she slowly said, I'm a person without a future. I don't care. I don't have a future either, he said hoarsely. He had once shouldered so many sins. All he wanted to do was to love someone. Even if there might not be any results in the end, he wanted to continue loving her. Qin Chen smiled and didn't say anything. He just slowly walked into the lounge. Lan Yu heard her voice from outside. Close the door when you leave. Thank you. Rather than thanking her, he would rather stay and lie by her side. But tonight, he thought, she needed rest, and he might not be able to resist it. It was very difficult for a man to be a gentleman in front of the woman he liked. In the end, Lan Yu left. He tidied up the place and cleared out the trash because he knew that she liked cleanliness. He also closed the door for her. Actually, Qin Chen knew everything about his consideration. She lay quietly on the bed and smiled. She didn't understand why Lan Yu would like someone like her. She didn't have a single trace of femininity, and he still thought that she was a man. Moreover, she knew that Lan Yu didn't have any sexual orientation in the past. But just like that, he had offended her. She was extremely tired, but she couldn't fall asleep after lying down for a long time, so she got up and went to check on Zhou Chengguang. Chapter 27:30. Qin Chen walked over and sat by the bed, replying calmly, yes. Even though Qin Mu was worried about Zhou Chengguang, she was still concerned about Qin Chen's matters. Now that she heard Qin Chen's words, she was a little stunned. Qin Chen didn't care. He was the one who drugged me and I knew about it, so I didn't reject it. Qin Mu asked softly, then, do you plan to be with him? I don't plan to be with anyone. Qin Chen's voice was very calm. Then, his gaze landed on Zhou Chengguang's face and he said softly, I can't imagine living with a man. Qin Mu's mouth opened and she asked slowly, then, do you like to live with women? Qin Chen looked at his sister and knocked her head after a long time. What are you thinking about all day? Then, he snorted. I'm not interested in women. Qin Mu didn't say anything. Qin Chen looked at Zhou Chengguang and then at Qin Mu. He said softly, go to my office and sleep for a while. I'll watch over here. Qin Mu didn't want to leave, but she couldn't resist Qin Chen's attacks and he chased her away. When there was only Qin Chen in the ward, she leaned on the sofa and looked at Zhou Chengguang, sighing softly. Qin Mu and Zhou Chengguang would probably be entangled together for the rest of their lives. She didn't want such a relationship. Between life and death was really uncomfortable. It wasn't a good experience to see the person you liked lying in a pool of blood. Qin Chen watched Zhou Chengguang until dawn. At dawn, Lan Yu came early. He had to be careful when pursuing a girl, especially when it came to someone like Qin Chen. He had to worship her like a goddess. However, as soon as he pushed open the door of the lounge, he saw Qin Mu, who looked exactly the same, lying there, sleeping soundly. He was stunned for a moment, then immediately left. Finally, he found Qin Chen in Zhou Chengguang's ward. Qin Chen was wearing a bathrobe and was bending over to moisten Zhou Chengguang's lips. Her movements were very gentle, unlike her usual inhuman self. Lan Song stood at the door and watched attentively. Until Qin Chen found him. He stood at the door and raised the breakfast in his hand. Breakfast. Qin Chen put down the things in his hands, slowly walked out, and carefully closed the door. She walked to Lan Yu's side and frowned slightly. You don't have to do these things. Pausing for a moment, she said, many people can do this. For example, nurses, secretaries, and servants in the family. Lan Yu, don't waste your time on me. Lan Yu looked at him and then smiled. See, I'm different in your heart, am I not? You can't say anything more venomous now. He put his arm around Qin Chen's shoulder and walked forward. These things can be done by many people, but I think it's different if I do it. His voice was very soft. Qin Chen, I know you don't lack anything, and you have a noble temperament. A person like me is climbing up the social ladder to get close to you. But no matter what, I will feel that taking care of you is a very happy thing. At least now, people are happy. Qin Chen sat on a bench and didn't care about his image. He opened a bag of food and ate it. After eating a bag of tofu pudding, he said slowly, when you are rejected, you probably won't be happy. Lan Yu found that Qin Chen was a cold person, but he was not without weaknesses. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.